Hello, and welcome to the study guide answers for this Genesis Bible study. These will be the answers for Genesis chapter 25, verses 19 through chapter 31. Isaac offers a prayer for his wife, Rebekah. How frequently do you pray for your family members? People should pray every day for their family members. It's in a way somewhat selfish if you only pray for yourself and your needs and desires. If you have other people that you know could benefit from a prayer, it just makes sense that you should pray for them, whether it's your family or someone else. What do you typically pray for? Like most people, I pray for things like good health, that I have success in things that I'm doing. But praying is more than just asking for things. You need to praise God and tell him how good he is and give him glory. You need to offer thanksgiving to God by giving him gratitude for what he has done. We can give God blessings and adoration, so acknowledging God for who he is and invoke his grace in that way. And then, of course, petition, where we can ask God for things, and then interceding or asking God to do something for someone else. God's response to our prayers may be unexpected, but he always answers them. Why does God answer prayers in this manner? Mainly because God knows what's best for us. And God does answer every prayer, but it might not be in the way you would like him to answer it. And I heard this story, and I think it's fitting here, of a little girl, like 7 or 8 years old, who asked God for $1,000 on Christmas. And Christmas came, and she didn't get the money. And then her dad said, "Well, I guess God didn't answer your prayer." And the little girl replied, "Yes, he did. He told me no." So I think we have to realize that sometimes an answer can be no, or God can sometimes fulfill a prayer in a way we can't even see or anticipate. But God does always answer every prayer. What are the unborn twins in Rebekah's womb struggling over? The sacred author seems to be implying that they're struggling over who will come out first and who will get that birthright, and showing that there's already a rivalry between Jacob and Esau before they're even born. What does their struggle inside the womb suggest about their future relationship outside? Suggests that they will struggle outside of the womb, if not more so when they're not confined to such a small space once they're outside of the womb. And as the story plays out, we see that that is what happens. What are the potential downsides of trying to outcompete a rival? The main downside is that people tend to get tunnel vision and focus exclusively on outdoing their rival. And that's never healthy, because in that situation, people don't see how what they're doing affects others. And often, when you get so consumed over one thing, you end up neglecting or abusing something or someone else while you're doing that. How does Jacob's name predict his destiny? Jacob's name, which is he grabs the heel, and the English idiom of that is pulling someone's leg, basically means being deceptive towards someone. And we see on several occasions that Jacob is deceitful towards especially his brother Esau, but also his father. And we see later on, though, that he gets his comeuppance when he runs into a father-in-law who in many ways is even more deceitful than he is. Parents commonly show favoritism towards one child. Can you identify any potential issues with this type of treatment? The biggest issue is that misconception that because you're doing something for one child that you don't do for another, that's showing favoritism. I think it's common that each child needs different things, and then there is just more of a perception of favoritism. I don't think parents technically favor a child over another. They just need to do something different or sometimes more for this child and what they need in development than they need another. And then that can just give that illusion to the one or the multiple ones who aren't getting that sort of attention to think that that child is their favorite. So as a parent, you need to just be conscious and cognizant of that and maybe just tell the other children why you're doing that, so then there isn't that worry that, yes, this one child is being favored. How can parents prevent showing favoritism towards one child over another? Just be cognizant of the fact that things like that can happen, or at least that there can be illusion of it, and just making sure that if that does happen, even if it's just via an illusion, that the other children understand why you're doing that. Why is it not considered unfair when God has favorites among his children? I think there is a bit of a misconception in that some people think God doesn't play favorites, but obviously he does. Just look at the grace he gave Mary, and then that grace led to the ability of her never to even want to sin. And that's not a grace he handed out to too many people, so there's obviously some favoritism there. And I'd say God does the same thing that parents do, in that God gives you what you need and the tools you need and the graces you need to get to heaven. And from the outside, that can look like favoritism, but in reality, it's just God doing what's best for society and to get the most people to heaven. How is God able to do this successfully while we can't? God has infinite knowledge, so he knows completely how his action will affect that person and others, and we don't have that ability. We have intellect and will, and we can use past events to somewhat predict what's going to happen next, but we can't be certain that's going to happen. So God, having infinite knowledge, he knows exactly what his quote unquote favoritism towards someone will do, and we don't have that ability. What does it mean to possess a birthright? A birthright would be based off when you were born, being given certain rights, and we see a lot in the Old Testament that the firstborn tends to be favored over anyone else. And so as a firstborn, you usually got more of an inheritance, and then usually also a blessing of some sort that the other siblings didn't get. So possessing a birthright naturally would be on the firstborn. Now, as we see in this story, birthrights can be sold, as Esau sold his birthright to Jacob. Is it strange that Esau would trade his birthright for such an insignificant thing as a meal? Have you ever undervalued something important? How did this affect your life? It is strange in a way that Esau did that, but I think we all undervalue things in our life and take things for granted. And it affects our life because we're not living life to its fullest when you don't appreciate something that you have. And So I would say Esau wasn't appreciating the fact that he had this birthright and what would come from it. What steps can we take to minimize this type of behavior? Quite simply, understanding that the things you have and the importance of them. In other words, gaining knowledge of everything and the importance of it. When you understand something better, you will appreciate it more. So understand and learn about everything in your life. That'll give you a better appreciation for it. And then that way you won't take things for granted. Who is more responsible for the birthright exchange? Esau for being too careless with it, or Jacob for exploiting his brother's weakness? I think both of them could be held somewhat more accountable than the other. Esau, by this time, would have understood that his brother was a deceiver and probably knew that he would want his birthright. So he shouldn't have put himself in a situation where he would be vulnerable and his brother could take advantage of it. So in that way, I could say Esau. But then Jacob could have just not taken advantage of his brother in the desperate situation that he was in and just given him some food and not required the birthright for it. So Jacob, in that respect, would be more responsible. And if you said, well, you have to pick one or the other, I guess I would go Jacob is more responsible because he could have just not done what he ended up doing. Isaac uses the same tactic as his father Abraham and claims his wife is his sister. What does this suggest about the difficulty of breaking habits that are passed down through generations? Generational habits are very, very hard to break in that you're raised in those situations. You hear a lot of times of children who see their father abusing their mother are more likely to abuse their spouse. And you can even say things like drinking, that there tends to be alcoholism running through family across generations, or even like teenage pregnancies and things like that. So the environment that you grow up in plays a huge role and effect on what you do. So they're very, very hard to break, these generational habits. Abimelech seems to have learned from his past mistakes and is now more cautious when faced with a stranger who declares his sister as a companion. Why is it a good idea to be cautious of strangers? It's a good idea to be cautious of strangers because you don't know if you can truly trust them. And people need to gain trust. So people who tend to be just completely trusting any stranger they run into, that's how you get exploited and taken advantage of. So it's always best to be cautious. And Abimelech, whether this was the same Abimelech as with Abraham or he had just heard the story, he at least learned from that past incident and didn't fall into that same trap again. The Philistines were envious of Isaac's wealth. Define envy. Envy is a resentment of what someone else has. And envy and jealousy are often mixed up and sometimes used to mean the same thing. But jealousy means to guard what one possesses or wants to possess and to keep others from having it. And we got a couple examples here. You can think of being envious of someone that you go to school with and the success that they have and wanting to have that success. Or you could think of like a jealous husband who wants to guard against any man coming on to his wife. Now, jealousy, though, can be a good thing because in that instance, yes, you should be guarding against there being any kind of extramarital affair in your marriage. But a lot of times when we speak of jealousy, we just think of the husband who's taking it a bit too far. So jealousy can be good because it can put up a guard for you, Whereas envy, on the other hand, is never good. In what ways has envy impacted your life? Thankfully, I'm not an envious person, so not too much, but everyone has been envious of someone else at one time or another. The key part is to understand when you feel that way to try to get away from that feeling and put things in perspective. And once again, as we talked about at other times, just being thankful and grateful for what you do have. What are ways to reduce envy towards others? First off, just appreciating the things you do have. And then secondly, and this is one thing that's great about Catholic theology, is just having a detachment from this world. And what that really means is not being beholden to materialistic things. And once you're not beholden to materialistic things, then you don't worry about what others have and if they have more than you, because at the end of the day, none of that matters. It's not like you can take any of that with you, but you can work on your spiritual side, because that is what will get you to heaven, not what you have materialistically. Who was more at fault? Isaac for wanting to bless Esau as if he was still the rightful owner of the birthright, Rebekah for advising Jacob to trick his father and impersonate Esau, Jacob for going along with the deception, or Esau for giving away the birthright in the first place. There's an argument for everyone here, making a couple assumptions, but I could easily say Esau, if he just wouldn't have sold his birthright in the first place, none of this would have happened. Isaac, I don't think he knew that Esau sold the birthright, or if he did, I think both Esau and Isaac thought he only sold the birthright and not the blessing. Since Rebekah hatched this plan, one could make an argument that she is most to blame, because if she wouldn't have hatched this scheme, then none of it would have happened. And then you could even say Jacob is to blame because he didn't have to go along with it. But if I had to say who I feel is the main person at fault with this, I'm just going to say Esau, because if he wouldn't have done what he did in the first place, none of this other stuff would have happened. Is there ever a good reason to deceive someone? Yes, because magicians deceive people all the time as a form of entertainment. Or if I watch a movie and they set something up one way and then make a twist, that's a good thing. So deceiving for storytelling or for entertainment, yeah, that's completely fine. Where deceiving becomes a problem is when you're deceiving someone for a bad reason. And then that, of course, isn't good. Is there a distinction between intentionally deceiving someone and lying to them? Yes, there is a difference between lying to someone and deceiving someone. A lie is generally spoken, whereas deception includes anything, and it can be words or deeds. And deceptions are intended to lead someone to believe what is not true. But generally, with a deception, they come to that conclusion on their own. Whereas with a lie, that's more, they're not really thinking about it and coming to that conclusion themselves. They're being told something that makes them believe it from what the person said. So if it's a bad thing that happens, deception can almost be worse, because in a way, the person really can only blame themselves, because things have been set up for that person to believe something in their mind. Whereas a lie, they can always fall back on who told them that lie and say, well, this person told me it and it was a lie. So they can blame the other person. Whereas with deceit, a lot of times they can't blame the other person. They just have to blame themselves, because their mind is what came to that conclusion. What are some negative consequences that a deceiver may face because of their deception? First off, one could say they might feel guilty eventually about what they did. And one can hope if they've done that, that one day they will repent of it. And another thing that can happen is that can really ruin a relationship that they have with someone. If someone feels like they've been deceived by someone else, they might stop being their friend, hanging out with them, and then that relationship gets splintered or broken. What made Rebekah willing to accept the punishment for this act of deception? She was willing to accept the curse because she truly believed that Jacob was owed the birthright because of what God had told her about the younger ruling over the older. So in her eyes, she was doing the right thing, and she was willing to accept any punishment that might come from it because she was doing the right thing. It's common for parents to soften the impact of their child's mistake. How could this parenting approach be short-sighted? It can be short-sighted because one day the parents aren't going to be there. So if the parents are always softening the blow of something, the child never gets a full appreciation for the consequences of what they did. And it can be a good thing for parents to help their children in these situations, but more than anything, maybe talk through them about why it happened, how it happened, and maybe give them some insight into how to rectify it. But they shouldn't take away any of the negative impact of what the child did, because one day they won't be able to do it. And then if they're always taking it out and softening it every time, then how's this person, when they're adult, gonna be able to handle the situation themselves? They probably won't be able to deal with it correctly then. Was Esau justified in wanting to kill Jacob for his earlier deception? No, he wasn't. One evil act doesn't justify another evil act, and that applies all across the board. So, no, Esau wasn't justified. Why was Isaac's blessing so highly desired? Both Esau and Jacob would realize that this was that universal blessing that was first given to their grandfather. So you could see why they would want it, because for them and all their descendants, they would have this exceptional blessing from the one true God. What kind of ladder did Jacob see? Could have been a regular ladder like in this picture. It could have been steps. Nobody really knows for sure, but it was some way of going from earth to heaven and some means to do that. What is the symbolic meaning of this ladder? The angels going up and down off this ladder is just showing that God is having interaction and cares about what is on earth. So the angels going up are bringing messages to God, and then the angels coming down are bringing messages from God to the people on earth. How does Jacob's ladder foreshadow Christ? The ladder is Christ in that Jesus is the mediator between heaven and earth himself. And he makes references to this in the Gospel of John as being the case. And he does say that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that he is the way to get to God the Father. So in the same way, this ladder was the way in the Old Testament to get to the Father. In the New Testament, Jesus is the way. After waking up from the dream, what did Jacob realize? He finally realized that the one true God was with him. And it made it extra special in that it was done in a place where there had never been any kind of communication or divine interaction with God before. And I think he finally realized that he did get this blessing that his father gave him, because God basically repeats the blessing that he did with Abraham and Isaac to Jacob. Have you ever felt God's presence? yes, I think everyone has felt God's presence to a certain point. Now, acknowledging it is another thing, but yes, everyone has felt his presence. Even just from looking around you, you can see God's presence. So, not even just feel it. How does feeling God's presence help you in your spiritual journey? I do have a good story about this. Before I was Catholic, my wife and I had gone to Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and there's a basilica there. And at this point, we were just kind of checking out all different churches, not even Catholic or any denomination. But as we were walking in, the bells started ringing. And we were just going in at some random time, and we were literally the only people in this church. So as we're walking in, the bells are ringing, and I just had this sense that God was there. Like I could really feel it. There was like a heaviness in the air. And then as we were leaving, the bells started ringing again. So you could say that was a sign. I later came to find out that that basilica had 24-hour adoration. So that while we were there, Jesus was there in the tabernacle. And so I was just like, wow, that's really amazing. That presence that I was feeling was actually Jesus. Jesus was actually right there. And I could really sense it while we were there. And I did not have any clue that that was what was happening. How does his presence assist you in all the stages of your life? Acknowledging his presence is great because I understand, just like my Father on earth, my Father in heaven has my best interest in his heart. So I have a good appreciation for the fact that by trusting in God, good things will happen. What is a vow? A vow is a one-way promise. So one person promises to do something for another. What is the difference between a vow and a covenant? As I just mentioned about a vow, it's a one-way promise from one person to another, whereas a covenant is, first off, irrevocable. It lasts forever, and it's between two people. So a vow can be one person promising something to another, whereas a covenant is two people promising something to each other. Is Jacob's vow to God problematic? The vow itself seems to be awfully contingent on a lot of things happening before he will do what he promises. So in that respect, yeah, the vow is kind of problematic. What do the names Leah and Rachel mean? Rachel means you, and Leah means delicate or weary. Why was Jacob not aware that he was marrying Leah instead of Rachel? It would have been dark when they went to consummate their marriage, and remember, there was no electricity or anything like that. And in the lead up to that point, Leah would have been veiled the whole time. So the only thing he probably would have seen of Leah's was her eyes. And it is interesting in that the one thing that it says Leah did have going for her was her lovely eyes. So it would have been pretty easy to deceive Jacob, especially if Leah and Rachel were of similar build. What makes Jacob's blindness an appropriate punishment for him? It's kind of ironic, actually, in that the deception that Jacob pulled on his father was, since his father was blind, he dressed himself up like Esau, and he had Isaac touch him, and then that convinced Isaac that he was Esau, and then he got this blessing. Now here, because of the darkness, Jacob was basically blind. And then by touching Leah, probably felt like Rachel. So the deception that Laban, his father-in-law, did to him is exactly the same that Jacob and his mother Rebekah did to Isaac. Besides looks, what other characteristics are important in choosing a partner for marriage? I would say having similar religious backgrounds is very important. Having a good, just general relationship and a friendship with your spouse is important. Being able to provide for each other, not even just monetarily, but emotionally, is also very important. And there's a myriad of other things that can be as important as well. Jacob fulfilled his part of the deal even though Laban tricked him on a technicality. Would you have kept this bargain? If I was being selfish, no, but I'm not really selfish. So I the what would have happened if he didn't go through with it was that Leah would have most likely been killed or at least been an outcast. And I don't think that Jacob would have wanted that. And I do think he realized the irony of the whole situation and probably realized this was his form of punishment for what he did. And I would think the same thing. I'd probably have realized that, and then I would have kept the bargain like Jacob did as well. Why do you think God opened Leah's womb even though she was hated? God was showing mercy to Leah. Since she was unloved, or at least not loved as much as Rachel, God would have realized by opening her womb, allowing her to have children, that within society and even with her husband, she would have gotten more respect because of that. In this context, what does hated mean? I kind of said this on the last slide, but it could mean unloved, and most likely it just meant that she wasn't loved as much as Rachel was. What is the significance of mandrakes? Mandrakes are thought to give you some boost in fertility, and they're still even used to this day for that. What is the irony of this passage? The mandrake passage, the irony of it is just that Rachel is trying to use other means to get pregnant, and at the end of the day, it is God who ends up opening her womb. So she goes through all these different trials and means of trying to get children, similar to what Sarah did, and she even takes it a step further by using an herbal supplement, if you will, and she still doesn't get pregnant. And it takes another 3 years, and then of God blessing her before she actually has a child. What is divination? Divination is the using of objects and other means to unveil the future, and you're trying to really gain control over events or other human beings. Laban tries to trick Jacob again. His plan is to take Jacob's flock, but Jacob creates his own strategy to outsmart Laban. Is Jacob's action justifiable? 100% it's justifiable. He's just using his experience of the years of being a shepherd to Laban's flock to generate and make his flock bigger and stronger than even Laban's. Can cheating someone who has cheated you ever be morally justifiable? The same thing I said about the murder and the killing that Esau was attempting or wanted to do, I would say the same thing here. If you're defining cheating as an evil, that one evil act doesn't justify another. And I would classify cheating as an evil. Now, I'm not saying I cheated on a game, a board game I was playing. I'm not talking that level of cheating, of course. But if you think of cheating of like swindling someone, or something like that, then yes, I don't think it's right to swindle them back. Have you experienced a situation where a family member tried to deceive or cheat you? How did you handle the situation? Thankfully, I've never really had to deal with a situation like this, but I can imagine that if I ever had to deal with it, it would be much more hurtful than even a stranger. So I think someone that you really trust, if they cheat you in some way, I think that hurts much more because that trust now has been broken. At least if it's a stranger or someone you don't know that well cheating you, there's not that bond that you built up and that trust you built up, so it wouldn't hurt quite as much as a family member. Does cheating a family member create a greater moral weight than cheating a stranger? I would say no, that it doesn't, in that both are evil acts, whether it's a family member or a stranger. Now, it might hurt more if it's a family member, as I just said, but I don't think it's any more wrong to cheat a family member than it is to cheat a stranger. Both are equally wrong, even if one will hurt more than the other. What reasons did Jacob give for wanting to leave his father-in-law? Do these reasons seem valid? The reasons he gave is because his father-in-law basically took advantage of him for 20 years, changed his wages, and just made life miserable for him. And those are justifiable reasons. And Jacob actually did do the time that he was required to, so he didn't have to stick around any longer than he did. Why do people leave their parental homes? Well, sometimes they're forced out. Sometimes they don't want to leave. Sometimes they don't leave. But normally it's because they're old enough now. They want to have some independence. They graduated college. They got a job. They have to move out of the city or state. Just common reasons. Laban wrongly accused Jacob of theft. Have you ever been the subject of a false accusation? What approach did you take to handle that situation? I think everyone has been, even if it's when you're a kid and you get your brother accuses you of doing something you know you didn't do. And the way you handle that is you just speak the truth. And if there's an authoritative figure like a parent involved, you just have to hope that the truth wins out. It can get a lot more complicated than that as you get older and things like that. But the main answer is just speak the truth. And when you have the truth on your side, and this goes for any kind of argument or anything like that, you should never give even an inch if you know the truth. So it's not always we have to get to a common ground and reach a point in the middle where we can both agree. If you have the truth and you know the truth, you should never try to reach a common interest and give when by giving you're going away from the truth. That's not a good thing to do. How did Jesus handle false accusations? Just like what I was just saying, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So he's the truth. Everything he said was the truth. So he never wavered on things he said because he knew he had the truth and it cost him his life. He was killed because of his beliefs of the truth and he never wavered. Even when he had a chance with Pontius Pilate or with the Sadducees, he never wavered and he kept on saying the truth. And I think that's very, very important. You should never give when you know the truth. There is no meeting in the middle when you know the truth and the other person doesn't have the truth. And that's it for the study guide answers for the 7th video in this series. I hope you're finding the questions helpful and enlightening and you're getting something out of them. And I look forward to making the next video and hopefully you'll enjoy it as well.